Hello and welcome back. So let's clean up a few things here. The 0% answered is not correct. So to fix that, we have to go to the view, mark test view. Where is this? This one here. And where else do we need to go? We need to go to this one. Okay. And as you can see, we're still using the auth get user ID to calculate the percentage. But what we should be using is user ID. So let me put user ID here, underscore ID, but I don't think it will know what user ID is. So let's try and refresh. And I thought so. So that's because user ID was defined here. So let me just copy it in the controller, that is, and then let's add it here. So say user ID and then put that one there like so. Okay, so refresh. Now it's going to be showing quite well. Okay, good. Then we will need to add some stuff here, and before we do that, actually we need to set the privilege for all these to be not student but lecturer. So let's put that as lecturer. Okay, otherwise a student shouldn't be able to mark a test. So once we are done with this is all good. What else do we need to do? I think that should do it for now. We can ignore all this posting content for now. We just want the display. Now we need to change also, if we go to mark test tab view, when we are looping through the questions here, we do check for if the question was submitted, which is right here. If submitted, if not submitted, we show an input. If it was submitted, we show this instead, right? So in our case, we don't need to show the input at all because marking doesn't require inputting anything. So we can remove this if statement altogether and just leave the other one. So I'll remove this and remove one of the end ifs here, like so. It should show that we haven't broken anything here. Let me go to the next. Okay, so still working multiple choice. Let's see if the others are still working as well once we remove. So same thing here, we remove the input and make sure you would mark test, not tech test. And let's remove that if statement altogether, and like this. Okay, so we reduce the amount of code required. Refresh, nothing seems to have changed, which means we are in business. Right. So a further thing we have to do is we need to afford the lecturer a few buttons. So for example, the lecturer may want to unsubmit this test. That's because, let's say, a student didn't do a very good job and the teacher wants to give them another chance to show what they can do. And so we can say unsubmit, and so there's unsubmit and there's auto mark, and what else? So let's come back here and see what we can do with that. There are a few buttons here that show up. There's submit test, for example. So instead we can say unsubmit test, right? So if instead of checking for submitted, we are checking for what are we checking for? We're checking for, oh yeah, no, this is actually true. If submitted, it says this test has been submitted, then at the same time, in the same place, we are supposed to show this button here. So let me copy this. Let's put that here. Okay, so unsubmit test. Don't worry about the link for now. Okay, so unsubmit test. Let's come back here. So here we have the submit test event. Now let's change that to and of course we have to go to the JavaScript part and change that as well. Then here we'll say submit equals false, or let's change that to unsubmit, which becomes true. Let's go down to the JavaScript, and are you sure you want to I don't know what you can say here. Maybe, are you sure you want to let's say remove this test from submission list. Okay, so maybe that you can get creative here, and we don't need all of this here at all. We don't need to know what percentage was answered to give that to the teacher, because it's irrelevant at this point. So let's remove all that. Cool. And let's come back to the top. So unsubmit. So what else should we do when the test is submitted? When it's unsubmitted, we don't even need to see it. So there's no need for this else statement at all. So just remove that. Yeah, so that should do the unsubmitting part. Let's come back to mark test here, and let's fix that as well. If excuse me, if it's a submit test, so let's put unsubmit here. So if it's a test unsubmit, then we do this. So we say update answered test set submitted is equal to 0. That's all we need to change there. And submitted date should be equal to, okay, so submitted date where test ID, that's okay. So the date, we should remove that. So date should be an empty string instead of all that. And what else? User ID, that's okay. User ID, okay. So everything else looks good here, I think. Now we can give it a test. So why I want to give it a test is I want to see what it will display if the test is not submitted. So let's try this here. So let's unsubmit. Okay, so it didn't even ask me a question whatsoever, which is not good because it was supposed to ask me something. And unsubmit test function. Okay, that's because I named it something else. So my bad there. Let's come back to the test itself and submit it again. So we can do one more test. So answered tests here. And let's go to the submitted. Oh, it's still submitted, right? It is. So that didn't do anything at all. Attempt to read property user ID on Boolean 139. Okay, so this is a problem because we still have the wrong link here. So let's go up here. This time it should work though once we change the links. So there is tech test here. So I want to change all instances of tech test, but it seems there's only one. So this one should go to mark test. Okay, great. So let's refresh again and unsubmit. Are you sure? Yes. Okay, then we have a problem now. Same thing here, line 139, attempts to read. So let's go back to 139 again. That's right here. Okay. So it's saying answered test row was not, it's saying this, we didn't get this row. So what I want to see is this. Let's do a show here. I want to see what it contains. Now, since it's a Boolean, I guess, let's use var dump. Okay, that way it shows us the data type as well. So it's a boolean of false. So why didn't it show us good results? Let's see if we didn't change too much here. Let me click here and see what we changed. Click. Okay, the test is still submitted, so what did we do wrong? Let me come back here and let's see. Okay, the reason we're having a problem is because on the link we didn't put the user ID. That's really the only reason. So we could fix that as well so that we don't see all these errors. If the user ID isn't there, then we shouldn't continue with this displaying this test. So let's see here, answer test row. So if this one answer test row does not exist, let me copy this, go back here, we shouldn't display any of this at all. Okay, so let's come back to this view here that contains all this information, and right about just after these crumbs here, access student, actually we can use this row right here the same way we said if row and if that. So we should add also this one and put another and like this and put that as a variable, so that all these should be true before we display anything. So that test was not found, which is good. But here, an attempt to read property user ID 139. Let's figure out how to fix that as well. So where is that 139? Now we should only do this if this is equal to something. So copy this, submit it is equal to true, and wait a second. Let's put an if statement here and say if that is true, then let's move that and move it here. Okay, that way we don't get that error. Refresh. Okay, so that test was not found just because we don't have the user ID in there. We can add it by just saying maybe guy.dude, because we know that's actually the user ID, and then it will show this time. So to fix the problem we had in submitting is we have to add the user ID at the end of this. So I'm just going to duplicate this part here, copy that and put it here. And okay, let me remove that second slash. Maybe I can put it at the end. And instead of test ID, this should be user ID as usual. And then the user role. So the answered test row does have a user ID. So I'll copy that and put it here like that. Remove the second arrow. Let's see if that works at all. So mark test, and the test is here, even though the test shouldn't be because it's not yet submitted. Okay, it actually worked to unsubmit it, but once the test is not submitted, it shouldn't show up here. So this is important. We have to go to the view, mark test view, and right here, answered test row, let's put another and statement here. So let me duplicate this, so quite a number of ands here, and then let's do this and say submitted like that. Now we're checking to see first of all if it's an actual object, and then if it is, we check if submitted is true, right? Now you may be asking, why not just remove this answered test row and just check for this one? Now the reason is that if this is a boolean, just trying to check for submitted from a boolean will cause an error. However, this won't cause an error the way it is, because if, for example, row is correct and then it finds that answered test is not even an object, it's just a boolean, it will abandon the rest of the checks here. It won't even bother because they are all ands, and requires that all results be true. So if this one is not true, it won't bother checking the rest. That's to save time, because regardless the answers at the end, it won't matter because one of them is already false. So even this, if this is false, then it won't bother checking the rest. Therefore, we won't get an error when it gets to this point. So that's why I'm doing it that way. And this way, this test was not found because it wasn't submitted yet. So this is how we can avoid those errors. So let's submit it again by putting a 1 there. And if I now refresh, we should see the test, but apparently we don't. So why is that? Let me refresh this. Okay, so submitted is still 0 for some reason, even though I changed it. What's going on? What's going on, guys? Let me change that to 1. 1 row affected. Let's refresh. Okay, now refresh, it should show. It's not showing, and when I refresh here, I find that it's 0. So something is up here. It means it's editing things, even though so let's go back to mark test controller, and let's look at the unsubmit part. Where is this? This is the one. So if it's set unsubmit, oh, okay, so that's why it's doing that. It's because when I refresh the page, there is unsubmit in there. So let me remove it from the URL. Okay, cool. Once I remove that, while we're at it, let's try and unsubmit and see what results we get. So let me click yes. Okay, that test was not found. Okay, cool. So things are working as planned. Let me remove this here, because it's the student now that needs to submit it again. But let's just submit it as it is and refresh the page. Oops, let me refresh the page, add 1 here. Let's see, do I still have it in there? Nope. And let's press enter. Okay, now I can see it. Yeah, so the unsubmit button is working just fine, which is good. Now let's see what we can do about the rest, marking and adding a auto mark button right here. I'll see you in the next video.